What's up guys, it's Pliskin here, and we're going to talk about a game I don't nearly talk enough about. We're going to talk about The Last of Us, and specifically, we're going to be talking about whether or not the combat techniques that Joel and Ellie employ throughout their adventure are practical or not. Alright, to start, let's talk about one glaring flaw with Joel's combat style. He is way too reliant on hooks. Now, hooks aren't necessarily a bad thing. They actually bring a lot of power to the table when you're striking. However, they leave you way too exposed. Also, the way that Joel punches with his hand like that constantly is gonna wear him down and do a lot of damage. He's exerting too much force, too much strength. Hitting like this all the time, especially when you're bombarded with a number of opponents, isn't smart because you're gonna get tired, you might break your hands, and it's really easy to block because there's such a wide wind-up time. Funny enough, in the game, Joel will sometimes miss or have these huge swings dodged, which will happen, and most of the time can result in your enemy just beating the living shit out of you, because look at all the openings that Joel created when he swung like that. His kidneys were exposed, his temple was exposed, everything. He was off balance. Now, luckily the game has a way for you to employ shoves, but to go from that extended position into that shove fast enough, it puts an unnecessary risk in a fight that you don't want. There's already enough risk there already, you don't want to add more by overexposing yourself. So Joel's constant hooks aren't practical. A much more practical strike that Joel employs would be the hammer fist that he does if an enemy is up against an object. This does damage to your opponent, but does less damage to your hand and to your wrist, so you can keep using your appendages in oncoming fights. A testament to this strike's capabilities and practicality would be how often it's used in the UFC. Now this is beautiful, watch. Joel uses his forearm on his opponent's neck and forces them into a wall. This is extremely practical because it is very difficult to resist anything towards your neck. So pushing your entire body weight into your forearm, into their neck, and then using that wall for extra damage, you're using yourself, your weight, and your environment to strike an enemy. This followed up by the excellent nier, which again echoes this philosophy of using your own weight and the environment being the wall behind them to do extra damage, is brilliant. So this is another example of a practical move in The Last of Us. Now, if you played Last of Us, you know Joel is very fond of using the environment to inflict extra damage. And here, rather than damaging his own body, he turns his enemy around and forces their head into an object, using gravity and his weight to push them into a ledge, which does all the damage for him, rather than him having to pound his fists into them. This is extremely practical because a wooden, metal object, wall will always hurt more than you punching an opponent. So you putting your weight and slamming their heads into something is going to cause massive damage. Also, notice that when Joel is grabbing them and turning them, his other arm is holding their elbow, maintaining that elbow control. And if you remember my CQC videos, you'll know that controlling that elbow stops your opponent from being able to worm out of it or resist. So that elbow control, Joel's weight, and then using the environment to inflict more damage than his fists ever could is extremely practical. Mind you, the wall variation doesn't have this. Instead, Joel is supporting his own weight onto the wall. This helps with balance, and if the enemy was a little more awake, they could resist, but keep in mind, Joel has also pummeled the living shit out of them. So doing anything to a stunned opponent will be easier than doing it to an alert one. Another thing that's practical is how Joel tends to take down already downed enemies, finishing them off as it were, by using the butt of his rifle, for example. Again, an object will be harder than your fists and your bones, and it's always encouraged to use that, because not only does that do more damage, but it also protects you. Another great way that Joel inflicts great damage to finish off an opponent that's on the ground is by releasing a stomp onto their head. Again, this is using the philosophy of not only using your weight and gravity, but also pushing their heads, or your opponent just generally, onto the floor, using the environment, a harder surface than you. So by using his weight and putting all of it downwards, using gravity to his own benefit, he delivers a very powerful, practical, and dangerous blow to anybody that's on the ground. Now, this next move, I don't know how practical it is, mashing glass into somebody's face in a way where glass can also break onto your hand. That'll probably have you end up with a lot of cuts on you. The throwing variation of this is probably a lot more practical, but I wouldn't recommend smashing glass into someone's face and then having it, also penetrate your own skin. However, touching back again on something I said in my CQC video with Metal Gear Solid 5's hold-ups or grabbing a prisoner and using him as a human shield wasn't really practical in that game because Snake didn't put a lot of pressure. In The Last of Us, Joel will always have his gun near the opponent, only taking it away to shoot. Now, yes, the opponent can struggle, and in this game they do, so you're on a time limit, kind of like in real life, because you never know how they're going to react to you holding them. They want to get out of it. However, unlike Snake, Joel can do something really practical where he proceeds to smash in the opponent's skull with the handle of his pistol. This is practical again because a hard metal object to the back of the head will do very high amounts of damage, potentially lethal amounts of damage. So grabbing your opponent, using them as a human shield, keeping your gun there as pressure, and then using it to smash their skull in is extremely practical because there's not a lot they can do when you already got them from behind. Another technique Joel employs is a kind of leg sweep. When he has the hostage there and wants to dispose of them without wasting ammo, he uses the pressure he has on their neck from that hold and pushes them backwards, yanking them onto the ground. Then this is followed up by a stomp using that whole gravity and environment philosophy again. I'm not going to go into it again because I don't want to be a broken record for you guys. However, I do want to say that throw is sloppy. He is using pressure on the neck, which is good, and I understand that he doesn't have any formal training and doesn't know of judo and jiu-jitsu. However, if he was able to glue his hip to his opponent's hip and throw them over, it would use a lot less effort and be more practical. If he turned this into a proper hip toss, it would gain more points in my book for practicality because conserving energy is everything in a fight. However, that stomp at the end is absolutely practical. A move that I'm not too fond of that Joel can use from this hostage-taking position is one where he lets go of his opponent, pushes them down, and then brings his knee up into their face. Now you might ask Pliskin, what's wrong with the knee to the face? You said before it's extremely practical. This is an opponent that he's been holding, not hitting, not pounding. This opponent, yeah, there's pressure on his neck, but he's been resting. You let go of that pressure and you try to just force him down. If you're a lot stronger, yeah, that'll work. However, he can push away, use that shove that Joel used when he was using his way too wide hooks, and then he could take out a gun or counter you. So while the actual strike is good, the state in which the opponent's in and the risk you take on by just letting him go from that position, I can't say that's too practical. Now on to my favorite technique, the rear naked chokehold. This choke has the same issue that Metal Gear Solid 5's crouching choke had. The position that Joel's in right now and the position the enemy's in, the enemy can use their legs to push up, roll out of that, or struggle. Also, Joel doesn't lock any of the arms back, so you can see the guy will claw and attack, and it's fine if they don't know what they're doing and they're just trying to claw your hair. Maybe they pull out a chunk, but they're not really going to hurt you. But if they have a knife or a gun on them, that's an entirely different ordeal. Again, a more practical version of doing this is just trapping one of those arms and then doing it standing up or lying down. But when you're crouching, it gives them space to push up and try to get out of your choke. And you don't want resistance. Now, in this, I'm not going to call it a choke because the guy's really just holding her. This escape that Ellie does by biting his arm wouldn't be practical in this scenario because the guy has a jacket, but if it's just his bare arm, then yeah, go for it. What's more practical is the way that she uses a hammer fist and goes back for the balls. The groin is extremely sensitive on a man. I'm sure for my guy viewers out there, I don't need to tell you this. Striking that is a great way to get out of it because that causes your opponent to have to recoil. Also, note what I was saying before about the chokes or just generally holding people. If they have a knife on them and they manage to get out, they can use that on you. And a knife is near impossible to counter when coming at you. So yeah, just take a second to think about when Joel was going in for that knee or when he was choking the guy and not holding the arms. And just look at what happens to this guy. Knives are dangerous, control your opponent's arms, minimize that risk. Now again, if someone's holding you or trying to push you into something like in this scenario in The Last of Us, and they're making the mistake of not controlling your arms, not going for that elbow control, not grabbing them, not making sure you can move them, you can do what Joel does here, which is an extremely practical move. It is a spinning elbow in which you torque your body backwards to send your elbow around and into your opponent. In this case, he lands it on his opponent's temples, and the temples are extremely sensitive. Elbows are always going to be more practical than punches because they're harder, you can put more weight into them, and they do less damage to you. So yeah, elbow is a practical move, and if anything, Joel should employ more of them. When it comes to headbutts, it's really risk versus reward. You can do a lot of damage, but then you can have a lot of damage done to you depending on what part of your head you hit with and how you hit them. So I'm not going to call this practical. It's not necessarily bad, but there's just so many ways it can go wrong. Now sometimes Joel will grab enemies and throw them down the stairs. This works the way he does it because he's just using sheer strength and more so gravity to just yank them, pull them down from that ledge, and let Mother Nature do the rest of the work. If you were to just grab a guy and try to throw him like this, yes, if you're heavier and stronger, you can do it. However, it is always going to be better to use a hip toss, a leg sweep, or another kind of practical throw. Because if your opponent is stronger, larger, heavier than you, this isn't going to work out in your favor, like it does for Joel here. Joel redeems himself, though, by employing the push kick. Now, this is a rare move that Joel won't really do too often, but if you're on top of a ledge and you have an enemy in front of you, he will do a push kick, which involves raising your knee into your midsection and then stomping forward, so pushing all your body weight outwards into your opponent's midsection. This, even when they're heavier than you, will more often than not send them backwards at the very least. There's also variations of this where you can break legs. This is an extremely practical kick, and I wish Joel used this more often. This throat punch is extremely practical. One, because Joel has his hand on the back of his opponent's neck, keeping them there, so he's pulling and pushing. Anything with pulling and pushing is going to be really practical. So he's pulling forward, and then he's ramming his fist into his opponent's throat, essentially crushing their windpipe. This can kill someone. This is extremely practical. Joel's defense is also really practical. He doesn't really know what else to do because, again, he's not a master of any martial art in these situations, so he can't really attack from this. But he knows to keep his forearms, elbows, and hands on his opponent's throat when they're just mindlessly charging at him and trying to attack him. He keeps them away. In this case, they're trying to bite him, so it's extremely practical. But even if they're trying to hit you, creating that distance and putting that pressure on them is very important. You can see Ellie fails to do this here and instead tries to push on their face, and we all know how that worked out for her. Moving into some blade techniques, we have some incredibly practical kidney stabs. Now, I'm tired of works in media and fiction where they make it seem like if you're coming up behind someone, you have to stab them in the throat for it to be lethal. Not in this game. A well-placed stab to the kidney can be just as lethal as a stab to the neck. And Joel employs that brilliantly by just charging it right through him and then using his other arm to yank it out. Fantastic practical move. That being said, a stab to the carotid arteries or the veins in the neck are extremely lethal. So if you're in a situation where someone's pushing on you and they have more strength or they're using their weight and you have a knife and this is a self-defense scenario, jamming it in their neck is a way to immediately immobilize them and get them off of you. Now for the stealth takedown version of this, rather than having an opponent come at him, Joel's at his opponent's back. He switches his knife grip to what we call advanced grip, which has the knife coming out from below your hand. This is harder to disarm and makes it less likely that when you're stabbing someone and you collide into a bone, you cut your own hand. So this is a very practical move for this setting for just rapidly jamming it into the neck, killing them fast, and then sneaking your way out of there. Note that with this position, like Ellie in this one scene, you can also use your other hand to stabilize their head, giving you complete access to the neck. That being said, it's always better to keep a normal grip for when you're being attacked because normal grip gives you a lot more offensive options. To wrap this up, I want to pick apart this one scene where Joel disarms this knife attacker. It starts off well when he's controlling that elbow and that shoulder, making sure that the guy can't come anywhere close to him or move the knife around, but then it gets really dumb when Joel just kind of grabs the knife out of the guy's hand. It's hard to disarm someone again in advanced grip, and they're not just gonna let that go. He'd be better off striking the opponent until they let the knife go and just keep on controlling that knife. If you try to just grasp it by letting go of your grip over their arm, your one defense, you're probably gonna end up stabbed. So yeah, it's not practical, this scene. So yeah guys, there's a whole lot more ways to take people down in this game, and if you guys want me to, I'll go over them. But I figure just the basic blade and striking techniques are a good start. If you guys want a sequel of The Last of Us combat being practical or not, let me know. This has been Pliskin. Stay inside during quarantine, stay healthy, take care of your families, stay safe. Over and out.